Hello, my name's Rob and welcome to Swift Slots. So this video is going to be slightly different. This video is going to be showing you a car that I've recently completed. I won't be doing any work on it today. So a few months ago I was approached and I was asked if I'd like to take part in a YouTuber proxy race for the Pioneer Legends series of cars. And my initial instinct was to say yes. So I rushed out and I bought myself my white kit and I set it aside ready to build it. Then I started seeing other YouTubers start their cars. I thought I'd better get mine done. So I set a week aside and I got all the painting and all the chassis modifications done to it in readiness for the race. So the car I ended up creating was this one. And what was really interesting about this proxy race was the lack of rules. You had to use a standard body with a standard interior and the chassis could only be lightly trimmed to allow for a little tiny bit of body float, and that's it. Everything else was pretty much up for grabs. Now, it was always my intention to make this car off camera, get all the proxy racing finished, and when the car's back with me, to make a comprehensive video all about the tuning of my chassis. Now, unfortunately, for personal reasons, I've had to pull out of the proxy race, so I'm skipping forward, missing out the racing and moving straight to this tuning video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a really good close-up look of the car on the turntable, and then we're going to move down to the bench here and I shall take the car apart and give you a real good look over all the modifications that I've done to my chassis. And hopefully there might be somebody out there that this will help and they can maybe incorporate some of what I've done into my chassis into a build that they may be doing in the future. Okay, so how did I get this body the way that I did? Well, I started with the Mr. Colour 1500 primer. And then on top of that, I put the Mr. Colour white, colour number 1. Then I masked it all off using the Tamiya 18mm masking tape by laying out the tape onto my green cutting mat, cutting it with a scalpel and laying each individual 5mm square over the whole back of the car to create this checkering. I then sprayed the checkering with Mr. Colour 110 character blue. Then the decals were a combination of the Pioneer decals here, the number 17 and a few other ones. And then the rest were made from the Matus decals. There's two different styles in one packet here to keep it easy for me, of those ones there. Then once I've got everything done there, I used the Mr. Colour 112 UV cut gloss lacquer over the top, and that got me everything you see there. And you'll also see that we got a chrome engine, chrome rear view mirrors, chrome sidebars, chrome exhaust, chrome roll cage, chrome seat and a chrome dashboard. And it's actually what they call black chrome, so it's darker than bright chrome. It's got that slight darkness to it, and that was acquired or gained by using Allclad. Now I don't know if you know about Allclad particularly, but if you don't, I'll put a link below this video to Barbatos Rex's website where he tells you all about Allclad, and this is amazing stuff. You put on a gloss black base, it's an enamel, and you let that dry for at least a day, and then on top of that you put on this top coat. It's very, very thin, but it's got metallic particles into basically a lacquer, and it gives the most amazing shine. And then once you got that on, you give it a coat of their water-based lacquer over the top to protect the paint so it doesn't rub off, because it's quite, you don't put a lot of this on, so you need to protect it. And also, I don't know if you can spot it here, really, maybe not, but within the engine detail I put a little bit of Tamiya panel liner to highlight some of the details, just to highlight the dark spots. So that's the body. I've also, so moving on to the mechanicals, I've got the body. There's a little bit of body float in there. You can see it and hear it. And also in the front, there's a little bit of body float you can see. Now I'll take off the bottom of the car and I'll show you what I've got going on underneath there. Okay, so staying with the body for a moment, I also chopped off the bottom of this grille because it was just a little bit too long and I was getting hanging up on the chassis. And to make that grille clear, I also had to remove just a little bit of plastic across the front of this chassis here to give me some movement. As you can see now, that grille doesn't catch the body at all. It's very close, but it doesn't catch it. So that gets the body all sorted out. Now, this is where the fun starts inside this chassis. You'll notice that there's some bling bling gears in there. Don't worry about that. That was done out of necessity. I'll get to that in a moment. So first of all, we've got some exceptionally wide back tyres. Now these are Wasp PU tyres from eBay. And you'll see how wide they are compared to a standard tyre. So just to give you an idea there, the tyre here measures basically 14 mil wide, whereas the standard tyre is only 10. So that's quite a bit of extra rubber. Plus also, the way I got these tyres onto these wheels was like this. Your standard wheel is shaped like this. Now that's not going to fit these big tyres, so what I did is I chopped off all of this excess plastic here to create the inner wheel. Then once I had that, I then created some alloy sleeves. There's this piece here, and I pushed the wheel into the middle of the alloy sleeve. So that gave me a really nice wide tyre, and you might just be able to see in the back of this wheel here, or maybe not actually, behind that gear, you might be able to see the aluminium just shining through, just through that gear. And that gave me the ability to fit the Wasp 14 mil tyres on there. Now the next major upgrade I had for this car was its ground clearance. Now the standard car, when you put it on a setup plate, the ground clearance, this is a 4 mil drill, is about 4 mil. That's really, really high off the ground, 4 mil. And the ground clearance that I've got on my chassis is, drum roll please, 1.5 mil, as you can see there. Now that was achieved by modifying the bearing blocks. And the way that I did that, or the way that works, is that your bearing block is here and your bearing is here. This is your bearing. And they have these little cast lugs just here. So as your bearing comes in, it snaps past these little lugs. So what I did is I cut those lugs off completely so that the bearing was free to move up and down. I then put a 1.5 mil piece of plastic card underneath the chassis with the axles removed, and then put car body filler in the bottom of the bearing groove, and then lowered the axles into the chassis so that the bearings came down onto a bed of car body filler with the packer piece on the underside of the chassis. And then once the bearings had completely dried, or the car body filler had completely dried, I put some super glue on the top of the bearings, just in here and in here. And that lowered the whole chassis down by a good bit. So you end up with this 1.5 mil ground clearance. Now that caused a slight problem in as much as the gears were a little bit tight. Now these cars come with an 11, 12 and a 13 tooth pinion in plastic, and a plastic spur gear as well. And the trouble with plastic is the gears need to be a little bit bigger to get the strength. So what happened was, what I believe happens at least, is originally the gears are set up like this, where the pinion gear is ever so slightly above the center line of the axle. But because I lifted my axle up, I then brought the center line to here. So this gear is exaggerated wise, is going underneath, this is highly exaggerated, is going underneath that gear there. So as you lift your main gear up, it creates a tight spot just here. Now that's easy enough, you just put a smaller pinion on there, but then with a smaller pinion you're going to go slower. So I didn't know what tracks this car was going to be running on, so I took the middle ground with the 12-tooth pinion. The trouble with that was the gear mesh was just a little tiny bit tighter than I would like. So I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll try a metal pinion, because the teeth on a metal pinion are a hell of a lot thinner than the teeth on a plastic pinion. So therefore you might generate a little tiny bit of backlash that you need. So I got the 12-tooth metal pinion on there, and sure enough I did create exactly the correct backlash. Unfortunately, the clips that hold this motor in place are extremely strong. So as I put the motor in and it went crack, the metal pinion came flying down and smacked into the plastic spur gear and snapped a tooth off, and I wasn't happy. So although I got really, really nice backlash, I'm now missing a tooth on my gear, and that wasn't good. So obviously then I had to go out and buy a metal gear to replace the plastic one, because I couldn't find a plastic gear. And I was quite lucky on these Pioneer cars, because the diameter of the gear and the number of teeth, although you can count the teeth, but certainly the diameter of the gear is actually cast into the plastic gear itself. I can't remember what size it is, but if you've got one of these cars and you need to replace that gear, if you take the wheel off, you'll see that the size of the gear is actually embossed into the gear itself. So it's pretty easy to find a replacement gear for it. So that's why this car ended up with 2 metal gears. I just didn't do it just to be flash. I did it to try and generate some backlash in the now tight gear mesh, because I've lifted the axle up, and then in doing that I snapped off a tooth. So I ended up having to have metal gears, but they are very nice. So that's why I've ended up with metal gears. And the other thing that I did before I actually glued the axle bearings is I cut, or snapped off in fact, this bearing block here, scribed it across the bottom and snapped it off. And the reason I snapped it off is because you don't lose material. When you snap something off, you don't lose material. So I scribed it across the bottom with the motor out and the axle out, snapped off that bulkhead here, and then moved it inboard about 1 millimeter to create this clearance here, because it was just a little tiny bit too wide. You can see the difference in plastic between the Pioneer here and here. It was about the same on this side. So you can see I've taken off about 1 to 1.5 millimeters of plastic down this side and moved this bulkhead in slightly. And this chassis actually glues together with MEK, or plastic weld. It melts it extremely effectively, so there's no problem with gluing bulkheads and things back on with some plastic card. And then I've just made this extra bulkhead across the back here just to reinforce what I'd done, and I put a few extra bits of reinforcing down there as well, a bit slithers of plastic card, just to make that bulkhead super strong again. So that's that. There's a piece of 10-gram lead here, which all I did was I drilled the 3 holes, the corresponding 3 holes to the electronic hatch there, corresponding, popped the metal on, the lead on, and then just put a soldering iron on the top and just flattened out those posts. So that is actually part of the door. It's never going to go electronic anyway, so it doesn't matter to me. And the front guide has been replaced. You can see it's very, very tight, but very free to move. And that is a standard slotting plus guide. And the way that I got that in there was I drilled out this hole in the front to about 4.2 mil, and I turned up a tube and I popped the tube in there. So the internal of the tube is 3.6 mil and the outside was 4.2 mil. And then once the tube was pushed in there nice and tight, I just put my 3.6 mil drill back up and down through the hole just to make sure that it was super smooth on the Slotting Plus guide to get rid of the original guide. And then there's a plastic card spacer inside there that I thinned down so that when the car is sitting on its setup plate, you get a small amount of tyre movement there, as you can see, but the wheels are still free to turn when the chassis is down, so that's perfect. This piece here is simply a piece of plastic card bent up like a goalpost. I glued it into the hole that's there for whatever reason, I don't know why that's there, and it's just to route the wires through to keep the wires in a nice straight plane. And for those that are curious about weight, the weight of this car is 74.58 grams, and the weight of a standard car is 66.37. And the width of the two cars, my modified one and the standard one, is still identical to the original car. And there we are. That's what I've done with my car. So, you've seen all my little secrets of what I've done to my car. Now it's time to see what it'll do on the track compared to a standard car. Now this is a totally standard Pioneer Legends car. All I've done is unscrewed it from the base and plonked it on my table. And it's exactly the same body style as the one that I've built. So, let's hit the track and see the difference. Okay, so by this point you may have started to form an opinion, but what are the track times? Well, here they are. Oh my, what a whitewash. But there you are. So I guess that my improved car is genuinely improved. Now, these cars as standard are really very good. And I'm obviously running my cars on Crow Valley, which is an MDF routed track. Now, these tyres are actually pretty grippy, but the trouble is they're a little bit out of round. So it makes this standard car really jumpy. It's very jumpy on acceleration because if the tyres are slightly egg-shaped, they want to jump the car. So that causes a problem on acceleration. It also causes a big problem on deceleration because if the tyres aren't hard to the track, they're not braking. So your braking zones will vary depending on whether the car's in hop or in contact with the track. So to be fair, this standard car really needs its tyres, at the very least, needs its tyres truing, at the very least, to give it half a chance. Now you could accuse me of sandbagging this car to make my car look good, but I can absolutely assure you that was not the case. I tried many times to stitch 7 laps together with the standard car to give this car a really good time. And many times I just fell outside the 60 seconds mark, and I thought I can't come to the video with a car that's greater than 60 seconds. It's got to be 50 something. And I tried and I tried and I tried to get it to the 50s, and eventually I managed to squeeze in that 59 odd. But I really did try. And to be fair, I only tried 3 times to get this car to 48 odd. That's all it took. 3 times. It's absolutely planted. It's a monster car to drive. It's unbelievably stable and unbelievably smooth. It just is that good. So I really wasn't sandbagging this car. If I was to true these tyres, just true the tyres to stop the hop, I do believe I could get this car to 55 seconds. It's still not going to be as good as this one because of the width of the tyres and the centre of gravity and so on and so forth. Now, because of editing, the track run that you see doesn't necessarily respond to the time that the car got. So when I was making this video, I got my stopwatch out and I actually recorded the time that you see this car going round the track, and it came to about 55 or 56 seconds. So if you think that what you saw on screen with this car going around the track was quick, bearing in mind that's about 56 seconds. This car did 48 odd, so it's almost a second quicker per lap than what you saw when it's racing around the track. So if you thought it was quick then, imagine what it's like in real life. It's an absolute beast. Now obviously I'm not the only one that can make a Pioneer Legends car go quickly. There are other guys in the race that I'm sure will create some absolute track monsters, and good luck to you all. So hopefully you've enjoyed the tour around my car, and maybe it sparked an idea or two for one of your future builds. Who knows? Anyway, if you've enjoyed this content, maybe you'll subscribe, and if you could hit the little bell, that'd be awesome. So until the next time, thank you very much.